All right, let's move on right now and introduce to you our next special guest and our next panel coming up. This is Craig Miller. He is the president of government systems at Viasat, a global communications company that believes everyone and everything can be connected through the power of their satellites. Craig is a strategist, pragmatist, a team builder, an innovator, and mentor with a demonstrated history of gestating, growing, and operationalizing businesses to rapidly provide customer-centric solutions in the communication, defense, and space industries. So, Craig, welcome. Delighted to have you here. How are you doing on this Thursday?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic, and thank you for the intro. And it seems like you've scraped my LinkedIn profile. That had a very LinkedIn feel to it. So.
Well, I'll tell you what, there were some wild and crazy words in there. I mean, it's very impressive, but we can't thank you enough for stopping by. It's all yours. Take it away, my friend.
Absolutely. So first of all, I'd love to thank our sponsors at America's Future Series today and putting on the Space Innovations Summit. And thanks to our special guests today, who are Wayne Monteith, who is the Associate Administrator in the Office of Commercial Space Transportation at the Federal Aviation Administration, and Marty Whelan, Senior Vice President of Defense Systems Groups for the Aerospace Corporation. So thank you both for coming by today. So we'll jump into the topic here. Today, we're going to talk about space safety and space sustainability and the effect it has on commercial and governmental markets, and really the world going forward. And some view space as a limited resource and a global commons that should be preserved for the fair use and benefit of all people of Earth. Alternatively, some have said space is big and there's little to be concerned about, as large numbers of objects, many of which are becoming derelict, have been launched into space in the last few years. If we accept that space is a limited resource, our responsibility as good citizens and stewards of the environment becomes ensuring that we make forward-looking, long-term decisions that ensure fair and equitable access to space for everyone. And with that, though, we've entered an interesting but not unique era where technology has outpaced our understanding of the effect on the world, or in the case of space, just outside our world. Space has become far more accessible, both physically and economically, than it was just a few short years ago. And while this is certainly an exciting and potentially transformational moment that could lead to connecting the unconnected everywhere, there are also potential pitfalls if we don't, as a global community, act responsibly to preserve the resources of space for everyone's benefit in the long term. The choices we make now may well have an effect, for good or ill, that will be felt for generations to come. And so with that, I'm happy to moderate this discussion today, and a topic I think that will affect everyone, either directly or indirectly, going forward for quite a long time. And as we get started here, I'd like to introduce today's guests. First, we have Wayne Monteith, Associate Administrator of the Office of Commercial Space Transportation for the Federal Aviation Administration. As the FAA's Associate Administrator for Commercial Space Transportation, Mr. Monteith provides strategic leadership and direction to ensure the protection of public health, safety of property, and national security and foreign policy interests of the United States during commercial launch and reentry activities. He's also responsible for encouraging, facilitating, and promoting the U.S. commercial space transportation enterprise. After serving our nation for 29 years, Mr. Monteith retired from the U.S. Air Force as Brigadier General in 2018. His last Air Force assignment was Commander of the 45th Space Wing and Director of the Eastern Range on the Space Coast of Florida. Mr. Monteith, thank you for joining us today. Would you like to say a few words to kick off your part of this discussion today?
Hi, Craig. First off, thanks for the invitation, and thanks for the opportunity to share a discussion with both you and my dear friend Marty Whelan. I really look forward to the topics. Probably to start off with, what I consistently get asked is, why is the FAA in the space business? I mean, it's the Federal Aviation Administration, and our history goes back to 1984 with the proposed launch of Conestoga 1. And what Deke Slayton and his team found was about a dozen different agencies that could say no, but no single agency that could say yes to be able to get to space and to get to space safely. So we originally stood up in the Department of Transportation and transitioned over to the FAA. And as you stated, there are a couple of different parts of our statute that are very important. First and foremost, of course, is public safety. and the protection of property and the national security and foreign policy interests of the United States, but also that encourage, facilitate, promote role for U.S. commercial space industry. And I see those two parts of my statute as symbiotic, because they also sit on a sentence in my statute that says regulate only to the extent necessary, which I think is important for our discussion today on how we enable U.S. industry to be successful while balancing that safety role. And we do it, quite frankly, about every 5 days now. Just a decade ago, we had a single FAA license launched the entire year of 2011. 5 years ago, it was a launch about every 5 weeks. And like I said, about every 5 days now. So the industry really is in a tremendous state of transition.
Thank you for that, Wayne. It really is an interesting and transformational time as space is becoming much closer. Our other guest today is Marty Whelan, Senior Vice President of Defense Systems Group for the Aerospace Corporation. Marty is Vice President of Special Studies for the Defense Groups at Aerospace Corporation, an independent nonprofit organization dedicated to the objective application of science and technology towards the solution of critical issues. He's responsible for promoting the use of corporate and government resources through horizontal and cross-program integrated planning and engineering. Marty retired from the Air Force in 2016 as Major General after 33 years of service. Marty's last assignment was as Director of Future Operations and Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations at the U.S. Air Force at the Pentagon. Marty, again, thank you for joining us today. And would you like to say a few words to kick off today's discussion?
Hey, thanks, Craig. I appreciate the invite to being here with you. I really enjoy my dialogue with you and my good friend Wayne Monteith, who we bumped into each other through our military career. So it's good to be back here with Wayne. I am on Plan B because, like Harry Radegui had some service disruption. Mine's not back yet, so I'm on my iPad. So I appreciate the hanging with me here. The safety and sustainability of space is important to me as an individual, but it's important to Aerospace Corporation. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about it because there are things we can do now to set standards and voluntary actions and regulatory actions that can establish a safe environment. And a safe environment then enables a sustainable environment. Safety is not necessarily everything we need to do, but it is necessary. Sufficiency gets us into the sustainability piece. So I really look forward to having a discussion about what we can do in the near term, what we need to do over the long term to ensure both the safety and the sustainability of the space environment. And Wayne gave some great examples of actions that have been done by regulatory agencies, but we're a learning organization. I mean, all of us have to realize the world as it changes, and some of the earlier panels that talked about the great opportunities that are there for commercial and great opportunities for bringing more people into the space community. That creates that crowdedness, that congestion that we've all known about, but it's coming to the fore now. And so pre-thinking and having transparency on safety and sustainable space issues is really, really important. So I think the panel for taking this on, and I really thank America's Future series for working this into the agenda because it's an important topic. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Marty. And glad you had a backup plan, and it just shows the value of having resilient comms. And so we made it work, and there's always got to be a pace plan, right? And so I'm glad you're still here, and glad it looks just as good as our cameras, so it worked out. So I'll open the question first to either of you. I'll let you guys jump in. What are some of the dangers of not promoting safety and sustainability in space? So this applies to all orbits, but especially in LEO.
I can start if you like, Marty. As we see, the launch cadence and the proliferation of constellations and objects on orbit grow and grow and grow. If we don't lead turn this issue, it's going to become out of control. And by lead turning this issue, I don't mean you roll right in with regulations and you try to fix this. Our companies that are currently operating in space, it starts with them. It starts with them being good actors. It starts with them being concerned about space sustainability. Because quite frankly, if you can't operate in space safely, there is no commerce, there is no business, there is no exploration. So it really behooves all of us. And like Marty mentioned earlier, I look at this from both a personal and professional perspective. And on a professional perspective, the harder it is for me to help the companies that I regulate get into space, the more difficult my job becomes. And the last thing we want to do is get to the point where we can't safely get to space, either for sensing platforms or, as we're seeing now, the beginning of a tremendous ramp for commercial human spaceflight.
Thanks, Wayne. Go ahead, Marty.
I would say that you just have to come to the realization that space is a limited resource. And I know everybody talks, it goes out to infinitum, but the space that we're trying to use for in the current realm with helping support living human beings here on planet Earth does have its limits. And so if you take any limited resource, you have to really think about how you use that and preserve that, not only for us and for our commercial opportunities, but for generations beyond. And so the dangers of not doing that is you will quickly expend the limited resource, whether it's the physical deconfliction that we talk about with collision avoidance, but spectrum from ground to Earth is one issue. Spectrum from space to space is, there's plenty of it until there's not. And so we need to think about how we approach this so that we can preserve the resource for all.
And you both spoke about preserving it for commercial use. Is there also is there a threat to U.S. defense interests in terms of space safety and space sustainability when we talk about congestion or access to space? And I'll let Marty take that one first.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say yes. That the more congestion you have, the more proliferation that you have, proliferated constellations, as was what Derek Trenier was just talking about, do provide a great capability, but they also provide some challenges that we have to work through. So debris and debris mitigation are issues that we need to have a discussion on so that you don't have an unnecessary collision. But even architectural design with these proliferated both military and commercial architectures, there's pinch points at the poles. Well, space is big until they coincide at the poles, and then all of a sudden space wasn't quite as big as we thought it was. And I think we need to talk about how we can create that separation and enhance. I don't think you can avoid everything, but you can enhance your capabilities and your chances of survival if we pre-think these.
Thank you. That's an interesting perspective. Wayne, another question to you on sort of taking it back to the commercial piece of it. I've spoken with several U.S. government leaders, and one of the concerns regarding regulation is they don't want to stifle commercial innovation in space. And but I want to explore that a little bit. Are there dangers to the commercial market if we don't protect fair and safe access to space? And can regulation be used to create a better competitive environment?
Craig, I think that the easy answer to that is yes. And at its base, it's only regulating to the extent necessary, and that's how you provide the access and how you facilitate or ensure continued U.S. leadership in this transportation sector. There's always a balance between safety and innovation and speed as you move forward. And as a regulator, you can be one of two things at the end of the day, and that's either an inhibitor or an accelerator. And as long as you are maintaining that baseline level of safety, or even enhancing a little bit, while still allowing that innovation to come in. I think it's important. But let's be frank here. Nobody really wants to be regulated. Whether it's the transportation industry, the space industry, the aviation industry, the food industry, the hotel industry. At the end of the day, nobody really wants to be regulated. But what a regulator does is we provide that tapping on the brake every now and then when somebody starts to go a little bit too fast and focus a little too much on the business side and not quite enough on the safety side. But again, it's got to be done with a light touch and really regulate or with the right regulations of the right scope at the right time.
Hey,
Thanks.
Craig, you're from the commercial world. What is your thoughts? I mean, you're asking us as governmental people on how this might impact commercial. You live it every day.
We do. And so one of the views that we have is as a commercial player, we don't want to be regulated either. But at the same time, we want fair access to the playing field as well. And so the danger is if one group or one company or one country monopolizes a given orbit or set of orbits or a piece of space, and then there isn't access for others to compete, and we no longer have a fair competitive playing field. I think in the end, that would stifle commercial innovation and disrupt and create a poorly functioning market. And my view is sort of another way to echo what Wayne said is the role of regulation is to make sure that the market is fair, and then the market will take care of itself from there. And sometimes it happens. We've seen examples of monopolies in steel, in oil, in telephone services over the past 100 years. And the value of regulation is sort of preventing those monopolies and creating fair and free competition. And that's what we want.
And kind of following up on that, we just promulgated a new launch and reentry rule where we went from a very prescriptive approach to a performance-based approach for the entire industry. And what that does is it doesn't disadvantage any one operating construct. And so it does provide that fair and equitable playing field so everybody has an opportunity to be successful. But I would also close that little portion with, this has got to be a whole of government approach. I don't think you can have one branch or one organization dictating one thing and the rest of government either trying to work around that or duplicating what they're doing. Again, that just disadvantages U.S. industry.
Agree. And that's the other piece of it too, is we want to make sure that space is an international domain. We want to make sure that American companies have a fair and free chance to compete, but also our international partners and competitors do too. We want it to be a domain that everyone gets to use. Okay, so switching gears a little bit here, another step towards space safety and sustainability is quantitatively understanding the problem and having a sort of data-driven model to understand which behaviors are safe and which are sustainable and which aren't. What is your view on the current understanding of this problem, and who should be working on this, or who is working on this? I'll go to Marty first on this one.
Yeah, the quantitative piece is very hard because just the data is very difficult to all agree upon. But there are efforts underway that people that are trying to do things like transparency on data that's on orbit so that we can better understand space traffic management. And the Department of Commerce has lead on that with help from all the other government agencies. But that's just one of the silos. And if you give me a little latitude here and you say launch is a silo, and Wayne's organization really does some great work there and does the regulation and licensing, and on orbit's a silo, operations a silo. To bring all those concerns together has been difficult. So aerospace was urged, my company was urged to stand up an entity that can kind of bring that together and bring all of the participants together, the technical bench that we have together, and try to create some transparency in there. So we kicked off virtually about 6 months ago the Space Safety Institute. You can go to aero.org/SSI and get where we are so far with the Space Safety Institute. But it's really trying to look at a way to collect and share best practices, and those best practices will be quantified by data-driven products. It's not just, I like mine better, so therefore it's the best practice, but really from an industry perspective, to include the government and the government's inputs into there. It's to help identify where there's gaps, where the government does a great job of regulating where they see things, but sometimes they're not touching all the right things. So identifying gaps that need to be greater insight from regulation, and then inform that through data-driven products. So whether it's a gap or whether there's an area of missing regulation, there's also, you need some independent assessment. You talked about, the commercial industry doesn't want to be regulated, and the regulators do regulate. So how do you do some independent assessment? So you get a group together that worries about space safety, which is just a consortium of all the interested parties, and start working collectively to bring that data together, to bring the thoughts together, to inform what can be done to establish safe practices, safe norms of behavior, and then bring that through different forms, platforms, convening people together to have the discussions, and then also be an institute. So there's training involved and workshops and things of that nature. And so I don't think anyone owns it, if you want a belly button. So we decided the Space Safety Institute could be a convener where we can start bringing that ownership together.
Yeah, and I think this is really important. I think aerospace is uniquely positioned as both a trusted voice to the government and an industry partner. And so you guys have an interesting position where you are on sort of both sides of the fence here, so to say. I think that's really important because, obviously commercial providers have a view of this and have their own set of models. There's academic models, there's government models, but tying those together and having a transparent way of looking at this problem is a really important first step in the solution. I'm really excited about what you guys are doing.
Thanks, Craig. I probably wouldn't be doing my job plugging my commercial if I didn't tell people, if you want more, it's an easy outreach via email. Send to ssi@aero.org. And Dr. Joseph Kohler, who is leading the effort for us, will reach out. We're looking for interested parties, thoughts. We're in the formulation stages. And so now's the time to get involved if you want to be part of formulating safe and sustainable space.
Thank you for that. And my view of this is that the first step towards safe and sustainable space is understanding the problem, quantifying the problem. And then once we have the data and something that we can agree upon that's fact-based, then you can take steps to act on it. To Wayne, what are some of the first steps that you could take towards defining and establishing space safety and sustainability?
Well, first off, Craig, as you well know, that this is a hugely complex problem, and the calculus just gets more and more difficult with every single launch. Marty talked about starting down the government starting down the path of transitioning space traffic management to a U.S. civil agency, the Department of Commerce, under Space Policy Directive 3 in 2018. Well, between that time and now, the number of active satellites on orbit has doubled. And so this problem just keeps getting worse. And so, I think what you really need, and the benefit of switching to a civil agency, is that better understanding. You need better data collection. You need better processing power so that you can do something do something with your data that is actually actionable. And I think that's really foundational before you can start managing or coordinating any of this traffic. Marty has spoken a couple of times about, while space may be infinite, the space around Earth is not infinite. There is a carrying capacity. And the more carrying capacity you have, the more room there is for everyone. And the only way to increase your carrying capacity is understand where everybody is and make sure things don't bump into each other. And I would sort of liken it to the Beltway here around the National Capital Region. It's got a carrying capacity. But if you start leaving abandoned cars in the road or abandoned tires or anything else, other parts, guess what? All of a sudden your carrying capacity starts going down. And I see that, as we have these constellations in the thousands or tens of thousands on orbit, and not being able to do anything about the satellites and payloads and trash that are no longer usable. So you've really got to start down that path. And again, it's going to have to be a whole of government with a partnership with industry and organizations like the Space Safety Institute for us to be able to tackle this.
Yeah, I agree that this is a whole of government, a whole of industry, and really an international problem. It's going to be very difficult to solve this unilaterally. It has to be all the stakeholders have to agree to what safe is and how they're going to go about it. In that context, though, does the U.S. have a role in establishing norms and behaviors for the safe and sustainable use of space? And if so, why is it important for the U.S. to take the lead in this effort? And I'll let Marty answer that one first.
I think yes. Yes, the U.S. Should have a role there, absolutely. And why is it important for the U.S. to lead? First of all, depth of knowledge. We have a strong legacy. You go back to the 50s and the 60s and everything that has been gathered. That's not all lost knowledge. That's actually formative knowledge that our civil, space partners and the military space partners have all gained a great deal of knowledge, and that helps inform what is good behavior and what is bad behavior. We've made mistakes along the way, and we've left big rocket bodies in orbit that, knowing what we know now, we probably wouldn't have done then. And so how can you bring that knowledge to everybody, especially people who are new to the community? Second of all is there's a burgeoning commercial market, and the U.S. is a big part of that. So as the economic engine of the United States, the U.S. should continue to promote that and take a leadership role to make sure that that economic engine can be used for the United States and for the world and for the safety of humanity. And then finally, the U.S. should be in the lead, because if you're not driving, you'll be driven. We need to establish a role here based on those other elements, the legacy, knowledge, and the economic engine, but to shape good practices, norms, and performance. And it's informed by a great deal of experience. And we can learn from other domains. The law of how you operate at sea is informed by years and years of experience of what's good behavior and bad behavior. Space, we haven't been there nearly as long, but we have to come up that learning curve much faster so that we can establish those proper norms.
Yeah, absolutely. There's multiple reasons there. Wayne, I'll let you respond to that too. So why is it important for the U.S. to take the lead here?
I'll piggyback right on what Marty alluded to or outright stated. First off, the norms and the behaviors are going to be developed. And if we're not going to lead that effort, we will be in follow mode. We will just be another dog on the sled team. And so not only with our tremendous history in the commercial space sector, at the present, there is no country in the world or group of countries in the world that can match what U.S. commercial industry is doing in space. They just can't. And so between sheer volume, expertise, and quite frankly, having the little colloquialism, but having the biggest dog in the fight, you really need to. And again, it's not just to give U.S. industry an advantage, but it's really to ensure it's done right. And it's done in a manner that everybody can be successful. And in my organization, we're doing what we can by doing outreach to other spacefaring countries to help them develop their own regulations that, quite frankly, in a couple of cases are almost identical to that regulation I was alluding to earlier that we just promulgated. And so what that does is it starts to create that framework that we're all operating off the same standard. So when a U.S. company goes abroad, they already know how to operate. And when these other burgeoning countries start operating more and flying in space, they've got that safe framework and a sustainable framework from which to operate from.
That's really, I'm sort of really impressed by that the FAA is taking steps sort of bilaterally and multilaterally to form a collaborative framework with other countries, because I think that something like that is going to be the basis of how we get to norms and behaviors. Is the FAA doing anything else to take the lead in promoting safe and sustainable space?
Well, we absolutely are. And so it's not just an overarching collaboration, but for example, last month, I committed to a 1-year detail, or what the Brits call a secondment, to the UK to help them refine and finalize their whole regulatory framework. Because we've got US companies that are currently trying to or planning to launch from the UK. We've done the same thing with New Zealand. And I'm not sure where the model will eventually take us. We're not trying to set that single standard, but like you said, we're looking at this from a framework, a collaborative, cooperative framework that we're all moving in the same direction towards that same goal, which is safe and sustainable operations in space.
And so another way to expound upon this is, so we've been talking about how the US should take the lead. What role does the US government have, and what agencies are best aligned to sort of create these norms and enforce them? And I'll let Marty take that one first.
Yeah, I think so. Wayne can probably enumerate all the regulatory agencies that the U.S. has better than I. I mean, he's part of one of, but not the only. So you can think about the FAA for launching, Spectrum, FCC, and their work at the international level with ITU, and so FCC is how we enforce it here. Department of Commerce and how they're working through licensing. So I think from the enforcement part of that, regulatory agencies need to do that. For a long time, the space domain awareness or space situational awareness, it's, the names have changed. All of that was being provided by the U.S. Air Force, now the U.S. Space Force and U.S. Space Command. They're not a regulatory agency. They're a DoD agency. And so it was a really difficult place to be, is telling people you might collide, you probably ought to be looking at somebody moving. But if you didn't want to, there's really not a whole lot that could be done about that, because as a non-regulatory agency, they were cajoling. And good thing, people don't necessarily like to have their satellites run into each other, so people tended to work cooperatively there. But you can't use hope as the method. Yep. You can't just say, let's hope that everybody plays well with each other, because there's days where either inside the United States or internationally, not everybody plays nicely with each other, and so you have to have that regulation. But internationally, we don't have as much pull. You end up working through organizations like the UN and the Commission on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space and other organizations, but you can use the bully pulpit. I mean, if you think back to this summer, the commander of U.S. Space Command talked about some unsafe practices that Russia was using with on-orbit assets. Previous to that normally happens quietly through diplomatic channels, but they came out and they talked about it. The effect of that was, then the Russian government, the U.S. government talked, and they communicated with each other, and we've come to a common understanding, and we're working together and have a much safer place. So having if you don't have a regulatory way to enforce it, use the court of public opinion and do it publicly to drive people to better practices.
Thank you. That's absolutely right. And then Wayne, how do you view that these norms could or should be enforced? And I know there's not a single answer here, because different agencies do different things, but.
Well, first off, it's interesting, and again, I'll piggyback on a little bit of what Marty said. First off, we're the only safety regulator, but I don't regulate safety within space, and so it's interesting. It's a little bit of Wild Wild West right now, the way we're set up, and so from an enforcement perspective, that's where I think it's critical for organizations, whether it's the Department of State or NASA, to be brought in, because you can bring to bear, those whether it's treaty enforcement or direct dialogue, or in NASA's case, science organization to science organization, because you're right, there's no single answer here, and so we've got to all work together to be able to particularly get players outside of the United States to work collaboratively and cooperatively with everyone else. But I'll also back it up a little bit. I think foundational to that is we've got to have that good data. We've got to have good actionable data. If the Department of Commerce is doing space traffic management and they call your company up 30 times and give you 30 false alarms, you're less likely to try to avoid a potential conjunction or collision in the future. As opposed to maybe they call you 3 times, and 1 or 2 of those 3 times you actually really did need to move. And so I think we need to evolve into that, because I see that as part of the problem, where it's not so much people don't want to do the right thing. The data is not quite there yet to compel them to do the right thing either.
And I couldn't agree with you more. I think being data driven is the core of this, because there's a sort of postulate we have to get through first, that there is a carrying capacity, and then we have to understand what the carrying capacity is, because if we're at 5% of the carrying capacity, there's not an issue here. If we're at 75% of the carrying capacity and we're going to go to 125% of it the next couple of years, there is an issue here. But right now, I don't think we completely understand that. I don't think it's well understood, and people are going to be less likely to accept regulation or to moderate their own behavior if they don't feel like there's a threat. And I think we don't understand if there is one or not. And
if I could quickly, piggy on or coming on top of that, when you look at corollaries to the aviation system, in the last decade, through the extensive use of GPS and next generation navigation systems, we have essentially been able to significantly increase the carrying capacity within the national airspace system. And that's getting aircraft closer to each other. It's more efficient flight paths, all of those things, which add up to greater sustainability and greater safety. And I see that model potentially being able to be used in space.
And then I'll sort of turn this around one way too. And so we've talked about the government and their role. Do you think commercial entities have a role in promoting sustainable space? And are you seeing evidence of that happening?
We certainly are. You're seeing it with putting systems. First off, putting systems up into space that have the ability to maneuver themselves autonomously as they get data fed into them. Of course, that works really well if all of your satellites are moving to avoid each other. Not quite as well if you're trying to avoid someone else. But I think at the end of the day, industry is absolutely central to solving this problem, not just from a behavioral perspective, but also from a technology perspective. There's only so much government can do. And we see that even in the transportation industry. While it was a government entity, we had incremental evolutionary changes in the way we conducted business and got to space. Now we're seeing revolutionary changes because of the way industry is moving forward, because they have, if nothing else, if you take away the money part of it, it's a different risk posture. And they lean far, far more forward than a government will that has to respond to the taxpayer.
Marty, do you have any thoughts on commercial and our role in protecting space?
Yeah, and I think commercial should be commended. To begin with, the Confers organization, that is a consortium of commercial, space organizations. That's looking at their consortium that looks for the safe execution for rendezvous and proximity ops, and for servicing an emerging area. And so waiting waiting till later, until there's a bad happening to form would be, once you pollute that well of space, it's polluted until we get better at cleaning it up. And while I know there's people working at removing debris, there's a price point that is hard to reach right now. So instead of using that as your method is, well, hey, we'll go pick up the trash when it happens, you use things like confers to establish standards and common good practices. And industry was not directed, ordered to do that. They said, hey, this is an area we're going to have to work well together, and they started it, and that's to be commended.
Yeah, I think we all have a role in this, and we're very concerned about this. We're running very short on time, and I did get a bunch of really interesting questions through the chat here. We don't have time to take one of them, but I did want to bring one of these to our attention here. The question is, if the U.S. takes a lead in regulation or enforcing norms and behaviors, does that risk pushing innovation offshore? Because we've seen certain international players have no problems vacuuming up American innovation. And so are we at risk of, if we try to provide safe space, does that risk pushing innovation offshore, and how do we address that? And I'll let Wayne answer that first.
Craig, great question. And I think it absolutely does. And that's where I get back to right regulation, right scope, right time. It's got to be a balance. If we are overly burdensome on U.S. industry, and from my perspective, the U.S. space transportation industry, absolutely there is an opportunity for our payload suppliers to go offshore. But it's got to be balanced. And so it's in nobody's interest, really, even going offshore, if you are unsafe, if you're dropping boosters on towns or villages, creating environmental disasters, that doesn't benefit anyone. And so it's incumbent upon us as regulators to have that light touch and to ensure that U.S. industry is successful and we don't have that exodus offshore. That's why I'm pleased that I still have that second part of my statute, which is encourage, facilitate, and promote the U.S. commercial space industry.
Yeah, Marty, do you have a take on that?
Yeah, I'm fearful that it could drive it. I don't think it automatically drives innovation offshore. And so, Wayne kind of had a remedy there, which is to, use the right touch when you're doing regulation. That certainly will be helpful. Something Wayne said earlier in the conversation really plays here is it's a whole of government issue. Wayne's example was in his wheelhouse, and that's great because that's where he is. But if you look at, technology export laws, they were written at a time for a really good purpose, and the list expanded. It's always worthwhile going back and looking at that and seeing, is limiting that technology actually limiting our competitiveness, or is limiting that technology still serve a good purpose for the United States? So it's, I don't dismiss the work that was done years ago to establish those lists. I think they were for a good purpose and was good regulatory work. But like all good regulatory work, it needs to be revisited for the times that you have and the times of the future. And it's really going to take a whole of government approach to make sure we're not driving innovation offshore. And there's creative ways. I mean, right now, services is a much easier thing to sell ubiquitously around the world. So we should at least be promoting the services being more available around the world to maintain some leadership in the service industry, whether it's communication services or imagery services that are provided by U.S. companies.
Thanks. I agree that it's going to take a light touch. There's subtlety here, and if this was an easy problem, we wouldn't be talking about it. And just in our closing moments here, I'll turn it back over to Wayne and Marty if you guys would like to make any closing comments or last thoughts. The floor is yours.
Marty?
Yeah. I just want to thank you again for having us here and being able to be on a panel with you, Craig, and with you, Wayno. It makes me feel good that I might have actually made something out of my life to be around with big brain guys like you. And I posted in the chat. The Space Safety Institute. Like I said, it's just beginning. So reach out to them and Dr. Joseph Kohler. We really want to bring everyone together to make this a sustainable, safe space environment.
And I would say the same thing. Craig, thanks so much for having us on. Marty, always great to share a stage with you. This is an incredibly important topic, and it's something that we've got to tackle. And with collaboration between government and industry, I am absolutely confident that we can get ahead of this problem and we can solve it.
Gentlemen, the honor has been mine. It's been a pleasure to share this stage with you. I look forward to seeing you both again sometime soon. Thank you again for your time, your insight, and your wisdom. And turn it back over to the America's Future series.
Thanks, Craig. Well done. And Marty and Wayne, thank you both very much for being a part of this. We very, very much appreciate your time on this Thursday afternoon. Craig, well done. Great to see you. And we'll look forward to seeing you down the road. Thank you much. All right. Fantastic. Well, that was great. That was good stuff.
So thanks to Craig and Viasat for being one of our sponsors.
Yes, for sure.
And then I just want to emphasize this. It's really important that we be thoughtful about this new economy and sustainability and all the stuff that's up in space. I lived in a town called Frisco, which is the fastest growing city in America for 20 something years. It was 5,000 people when I first looked at it, thought it was too small. Came back 2 years later, it was 20,000, right?
It was getting too big.
Left a little while ago, 2 years ago or so, and it was 200,000.
Isn't that something?
In under 15 years. And the city has done a fantastic job planning for all that congestion and all that traffic and all that kind of stuff, but it's just really hard. Space is the same thing, only on steroids, right?
A good way to put it.
So it's more complicated. Things fly into each other. They fall on top of people's heads. It's really important that people have clear vision for this going forward. And I'm glad that there are people like them that are planning this out.
Totally agree. Totally agree, David.